first encountered Judy when she was on a panel after viewing the film Kiss the Ground. And she was with a representative from Rodale Institute and also one from Natural Grocers. And she brought in a really important part of this whole regenerative agriculture is that what we can do as individuals, not just mega agriculture. So I was very excited that she agreed to come and talk to us today. Judy is a senior education specialist with the Denver Urban Gardens, and she's spent a lifetime implementing strategies
Don't worry about this yet.
Youth and adults to the experiential teachings inherent in garden-based learning opportunities. Her background is in horticulture, horticultural and social work, specializing in high-risk youth studies, plus 4 years working with diverse cultural communities in Brazil, associated with the Peace Corps. She utilizes an asset-based approach, passionately believing that every child and adult has the capacity to be a leader in their community when they are provided with the seeds for success. In her role with Denver Urban Gardens, she has developed and implements the Denver Master Composter Training and Outreach Program. And she was instrumental in helping to design a program that educates elementary age students about healthy bodies and healthy gardens. It's called the Healthy Seedlings Program. She teaches practical horticultural classes for youth educators, community gardeners, and the general public. And she firmly believes that gardens are the ideal milieu to bring together the wisdom of diverse cultures and generations. So we welcome you, Judy, and we're delighted to have you with us. Judy's going to present for about 35, 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. Since there are over 20 of us checking in, even though we can't see everybody's pictures, it would be helpful if you would write any questions in the chat bar, and then I will
I don't go that small.
And then I will field them to Judy in the order that they come up at the end of her presentation.
She's muted herself.
Sorry, I just muted myself. Oh, okay. There we go.
Pam, you're mute again.
Yeah, I think I'm turning it over to Judy. Okay.
All right.
You're on. Go ahead.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm so absolutely delighted to be here presenting. As I mentioned to a couple of you beforehand, I'm in beautiful Breckenridge, Colorado today, welcoming part of my Florida family here. So I have my 3 Florida grandchildren, one of whom turns 10 today. It's absolutely glorious up here. I probably should have brought shorts. And I also have my Denver Centennial family, so a total of 5 grandchildren. And certainly my Denver bunch has been used to growing things and getting their hands in the soil and doing worms. So we're going to talk about small steps that we can do to make our planet a little bit healthier, a little bit greener. It's not just to the large producers. Before I start my program, I want to give you a little bit of background. We're going to go through a couple of slides about Denver Urban Gardens. We've recently expanded our mission to say, you know, people that are growing don't only grow behind a fence. We have over 188 community gardens, but we're really growing in community. So in order to grow food, we need to think about the common ways that make us human and all grow together. So I'm going to have my son just help. There you go. So we've been around since 1985, a pretty long period of time. And we started with 4 gardens in Northwest Denver. And since 1985, we grow intentionally. We work with the community. We're not looking for a garden on every corner, but we're looking for the community to give us input on what makes sense for them. And we're looking for these gardens to be sustainable. So we have developed the country's largest network of community gardens. And we estimate that through our many plots in our gardens, we're serving more than 40,000 people through our gardens and programs. pretty large reach. And what we do is we develop and support. I'm going to bring my son in here because I need to see my screen a little bit more.
Judy, you're muted.
Little technology there. Okay, can everybody hear me now? We've just moved the people off the screen so I can see my whole screen. So a little bit about what Doug does. We develop structures to support our diverse networks of gardens. We really believe in community-driven food systems. So what we don't do is do a proscription that says there needs to be a garden on every street corner. And even if we were given the grant money to develop that, we know that the best input that we have comes from the communities themselves. So we want input on what they need, the support services they need. And thirdly, we provide place-based organic and regenerative gardening education to people of all ages. And when I'm saying all ages, we provide techniques from certainly I started working in kindergartners, ECE with worm boxes, all the way up to people of all ages and all abilities. And that means providing places in our gardens that have raised beds and attuning to different cultural traditions so that gardening can really be an inclusive medium. And I'm looking at this not going down again. Sorry about that. So. Okay, so some short things that we want to cover today. I'm going to give you a short history of regenerative agriculture, kind of a definition, steps the home gardener can do. We're going to talk a lot about respecting the soil because the basis of regenerative agriculture is healthy soil. And one of those techniques that we're going to talk about are different ways that you can decrease the tillage, decrease turning the soil. And then we're going to be talking about benefits of regenerative practices. And I'm going to end up reading you a short story that I do every year in my master composter class that's called The Lawn According to God. So regenerative agriculture actually comes from the basic principles of organic gardening and sustainability. And I think you heard Pam mention that when I was sitting on a panel for Kiss the Ground, the term regenerative, some of the people that were sitting on that panel were the head of the Rodale Institute. I had my initial training before I started the Master Composter training program at the Rodale Institute, which at that time was in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. And the Rodale Institute was started by J.I. Rodale way back in the 40s. And then he began a magazine called Organic Gardening Magazine, and then it transitioned into Organic Farming Magazine. So for about a week, I had the privilege of attending an intensive composting institute at Emmaus, Pennsylvania, where I learned some really simple ways that deal to supporting and respecting the earth. So regenerative, when we're talking about regenerative, we're not talking about taking care of the soil, but we're talking about leaving the soil in better condition than it has been for a long time. And through the techniques of these earth-centered principles, we aim to increase the biodiversity, obviously enrich the soils, find out some easy ways that we as homeowners, as residents can have can really lessen the effects of climate change. And we're going to learn how to conserve and protect our water supply. So when we're talking about respecting the soil, there it is. Those handfuls of wonderful live organic material. And when we think about soil, a lot of people say, Miss Judy, it's just, it's dirt. It's what I can just buy stuff in the store. It's more than what our plants need to grow in. If you look at the latest science, you will find out that it is incredibly connected community, macro and micro community underneath the soil that is actually a living organism filled with bacteria and fungal mycorrhizae that really have the ability to not only provide nutrients to our plants, but can actually capture and pull carbon from the atmosphere. So it is actually a living organism that gives back more than it takes. As I mentioned briefly, it provides nutrition, not only for your plants, but for that diverse community of macro and microorganisms that are absolutely responsible for our plant nutrition. If we're talking about respecting the soil, we're absolutely talking about compost. And I think that there's a misnomer. Certainly at Doug, I get at least one call a day from people in the community that say, Miss Judy, where can I bring you my compost? So compost is material. When we're talking about compostable material, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about material that was once alive, whether it be food scraps or landscape material, but that material is in its raw state. It has not gone through the heating and cooling and aging process of composting. Compost itself is a stable, decomposed organic material that doesn't heat up, that provides all the macronutrients and micronutrients that your soils need. Unlike artificial chemical fertilizer, such as something like Miracle-Gro, it does not provide a quick burst of fertilizer, of macronutrients, but a slow season-wide approach that feeds the soil. So those nutrients are released slowly over a season-wide basis. And when we do that, we get less water pollution because those nutrients are stable in the soil. The nutrients such as nitrogen, which is soluble, does not run off and end up in our rivers and produce algal bloom. So it produces slow, balanced plant growth throughout the season. So compost-enriched soils are really pretty amazing. They have the ability to promote really deeply rooted plants. And if we're talking about deeply rooted plants, I would love you to think about our tall grass prairies in Colorado that are a perfect example of an ecosystem that has not been disturbed much. I'm talking about grass prairies that have not been plowed, that have not been tilled constantly. Believe it or not, the roots of those grass plants can go down 10 to 15 feet to access water, to access nutrients. And while those roots are in the soil, they provide a living medium for distribution of nutrients that they gather. So deeply rooted plants, when you use compost in the soil, it has the ability to hold water just like a wrung out kitchen sponge. We did an experiment at our compost demonstration site near National Jewish Hospital. And this was probably about 15 years ago, where we worked with 6 plots. And in 3 of those plots, we used a rototiller to quickly break the soil surface. In the other 3 plots, we used a garden fork. In the 3 plots where the rototiller was utilized, we did not use any other soil type of amendments. In our hand-dug plots, we used compost twice during the season, homemade compost. Plots were planted with the same type of plant material, what we would call a drought-resistant, water-tolerant, or water does not use water-smart gardening, sometimes called xeriscape gardening. Drought-tolerant perennials in 6 plots. We photographed the plants through the season. The plots were watered with subsurface irrigation called netafim irrigation that turned on automatically when the water soil level reached 22%. And what we found at the end of the season was the plots that had received compost-enriched soil used 20% less water. That's money in your pocket than the plants that did not have compost-enriched soil. We let the study go for an additional year because these were perennial plants, and then pulled all plants, measured their rooting depth, and measured their degrees of disease and insect infestation. And we found a really interesting thing too. Compost-enriched soils, those roots were reaching really down deep in. In our heavy clay soils, like we have unamended in Denver, the plants that did not receive compost, their roots were reaching up for that water fix because they didn't get the artificial watering. That water only got turned on, remember, when the moisture levels were 22%. The roots were shallow, they were subsurface, and for a lot of our native plants, they were turning mushy and brown. And as a coup de grace, a good amount more of insects and diseases on plants that had not received compost. So many reasons to apply compost. So home composting is really easy to do. You don't even need a compost bin. For those of you who choose to do composting at home, you can use wooden pallets, you can use a bin, you can use a compost turner, you can compost on bare ground. But what it does is it keeps landscape material and non-meat food scraps out of the landfill. where they add to the problem of greenhouse gases. Now, we've just come from a whole week's Earth Day panel that we did at Doug. And one of our speakers was from CASR, our new Climate Action and Sustainability Resource department here in Denver. And we did some questions to the public. And one of the questions was an interesting one. It said, suppose you have a head of lettuce and it ends up in the landfill. And we had a choice of how long that lettuce would last before it decomposes. And choices lasted from 2 weeks to a month to 2 months to 2 years. And perhaps I should have posted that poll on this, because the correct answer is 2 years for a head of lettuce in a landfill. Unbelievable. And the reason for that is that a landfill creates compacted anaerobic conditions. So no oxygen for decomposition to occur. What does happen in a landfill as things decompose is all kinds of volatile organic gases, sulfur dioxide, methane, carbon dioxide, are given off that contribute to greenhouse problems and climate warming. Compost itself can be done in many ways, composting. So we can be using, certainly for people that are concerned about mobility challenges, concerned in turning a compost pile, or winter who live in an apartment, I definitely recommend vermicomposting or composting with red wiggler worms. And this slide was done last year at our compost demo site, where we've dumped everything out on a tarp, and we're going to be separating the worms. So we're basically using fall leaves and newspaper in order to produce a really, really rich soil amendment, which is even richer than backyard composting. Requires almost no type of an investment. My boxes in my basement right now, before they go outside, are done in some boxes that have got some plastic boxes that have just got holes punched in the bottom and the sides. I feed them twice a week, and they're producing this wonderful, rich material. Many cities, such as Denver, also have a subscription service known as a green cart system. And that's a way, obviously, for people to contribute to sustainability, because their food waste and their landscape waste end up as commercial grade compost. In Denver, what we have is our green carts go up to A1 Organics in Keensburg. And then with that service, we use that product called A1 Eco Grow in all of our over 180 community gardens here. We also have a partnership with all the Ace hardware stores here in Denver for that product, that A1 Eco Grow, is now being bagged and resold back to consumers. So it's a great from your curb service. Things that you consider trash are coming back to you in the form of really high quality, low salt compost. One of the most important things that I wanted to talk about is covering the soil. So there's a picture of the Dust Bowl here. And what happens the more that we turn our soil and the more that we have our strong wind conditions here, the more that our soils become really powdery. When you work a clay soil normally has got very, very small soil particles. And when you turn it a lot, that carbon that is captured by the roots in the soil and the network of connections between the bacteria and the fungi are broken and destroyed. So we get soil erosion happening, and we get conditions that mimic the Dust Bowl. So what can we do? We can cover. And we can cover using many things. In our home garden, I would like it so that if I visited your home garden during the summer, veggie garden or flower garden, I would not see bare soil at all. In my home garden, I use straw or alfalfa for cover crops. Later on down, you'll see me mentioning something like buckwheat or crimson clover. So that just like your skin gets burned by the sun, we don't want that soil getting destroyed or disturbed. So the more that we can cover it and provide that fine blanket, the better the plants are going to root. And additionally, using organic material, you notice I'm not talking rocks, I'm not talking black plastic, but as those materials, that straw, alfalfa, even weeds that have not gone to seed, as they decompose, they increase our normally low percentage of organic material in the soil, and they help provide an added source of food for our beneficial microorganisms. I briefly mentioned cover crops. These can be used in the spring and summer. Buckwheat honey is fabulous. It really attracts the bees. I use it in between my rows of, if you're doing corn or broccoli or even in between tomatoes. It's wonderful. It grows really quickly, very beautiful. The bees love it. So it draws bees to any of your plants for more pollination. And the way I manage it, before it flowers, just when it's ready to flower, I take a scythe or even a hoe and I tamp it down. I leave its roots in the soil. It's an annual. So it's going to die once its flowering is disrupted. The same thing with crimson clover. Cut it down, leave their roots in the soil. Again, their roots are going to give out sugars and starches to feed those microorganisms. Mulches, as I briefly mentioned, are also going to decrease the effects of soil erosion, help retain water, and regulate soil temperature. I would like you not to think about the emerging spring and how active and eager we all are to get out into our gardens, but how quickly our springs spring into summer. So we get, even in May, we can get temperatures that are, reaching up to 90 degrees. Uncovered soil is not good for plant roots. They really, really get stressed. So let's keep that covered. Again, you may think that, I have no problem with rototilling being used on an initial base. And I realize that it's much easier to use a tiller. It quickly turns over that soil. It produces powdery conditions. And as I mentioned, it destroys those communities of bacteria and fungi, and also breaks the glue-like particles that connect our clay soil particles together. Clay really is, people say, I can't grow anything in our Denver soils. They're just heavy clay. Clay is more difficult to water, but it's also a storehouse of nutrients, much more so than it's a sandy soil. So clay soils have got the ability to release nutrients to your plants. We just need to not constantly be breaking their bonds. So what can you do? That instrument that's shown in the slide is called a U-bar, or a digging bar, or a broad fork. And the way you manage it is you just step on it and rock it back and forth. So in using that and stepping on it, you're opening up soil channels, air channels, but you're not actually turning the soil over. If you don't use something like that, a garden fork is the preferential tool, or a rounded tip shovel. Turn over the top 3 to 4 inches. And you notice I'm talking about digging in aged landscape-based compost. I'm not talking about digging in manure. And the reason I'm not talking about digging in manure are a couple of reasons. Unless that manure has gone through the heating and cooling phase, most manure, first of all, is high in soil salts. Our Colorado clay soils are high in pH, they're alkaline, and they are normally high in soil salts. So adding too much of a manure-based product raises the soil salts even more and can prevent problems with the water not being able to penetrate down into the soil. And also with salinity too high, you may even get problems with seeds not germinating. So landscape-based product, do look at Ace Hardware for that A1 Eco Grow. It is a landscape-based low salt product. We had also talked about covering your soil. And then at the end of the season in the fall, we talked about using during the season a cover crop. But at the end of the season in the fall, planting winter rye, which is a grain, or hairy vetch, which is a legume, also is going to be growing before, will allow you to open up air channels. And since you have green matter there growing over the winter, then when you dig it in the spring, provides an extra source of green organic material. So covering it, doing cover crops, just minimal type of disturbing your soil are all regenerative practices that we can all practice. And in practicing regenerative techniques, we're not using a single crop. We're not just planting tomatoes or peppers or corn. That's what commercial farmers do. And what happens with that is once insects or disease are attracted to one or two of the plants, they're attracted to the whole crop. Additionally, in a monocrop, you have very little plants that are attractive for beneficial insects that are, invitational, that say, come and visit me, come and lay your eggs. So when we're planting flowers and herbs, and when we're decreasing chemical fertilizers and pesticides, we're welcoming a whole bunch, we're using a whole bunch of strategies, if you will, increasing the strategies in our toolbox that are going to allow us to have the best usage of our soil. So what are some tips that we can do? I want you to rotate your crops. When we're talking about crop rotation, diseases tend to build up, especially in our tomato family. That's tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potatoes each year, if you plant them in the same area of your garden. And some of these diseases can last in the soil, folks, for up to 7 years. That's another reason to not overplant in your garden. My goodness, I do this every year. And each year I tell myself I'm not going to do it, and each year I do. It's a good idea, for instance, to understand that one tomato plant, if it's a healthy plant, can give you over 40 pounds of tomatoes. So you might want to think about mapping out your garden and making intentional areas for your feet to walk and decrease the amount of food waste. Think of your family size. Don't plant more than you can either share or than you can utilize. And utilize flowers and herbs in your veggie garden to attract a whole bunch of beneficial insects and also repel garden pests. So integrated pest management is a fancy word that says all insects are not bad. So you need to be in your garden to look at what's happening in your garden almost on a daily basis. And it uses a combination of physical barriers to keep some insects out. It uses companion plantings such as flowers and herbs to bring some in. It definitely uses the least toxic method of pest control that I'll briefly mention on the next. And it aims to maintain a proper balance between our pest and predator populations, knowing that we have good guys and bad guys. We need to know what they look like in all their life forms. But certainly we don't want to eliminate everything that is flying. So some of the good guys that you want to certainly this is just an introduction, is to invite in the butterflies and bees, and definitely not be spraying things with chemicals and pesticides that are decimating the hives. To bring in the pollinators, and also to realize that flowers, the flower shapes of flowers, are going to be really attractive to different insects. Insects such as ladybugs, to get a good pest identification book. The person who used to be our state entomologist, Whitney Cranshaw, has written a book called Pests of the West. And that certainly is one of the best introductions to understanding beneficials and pest insects in all their life forms. That insect on the left, the lacewing, is one of the most beneficial predators. And you can identify a lacewing by its egg. It is the only insect that lays its egg on a little stalk. So if you see a little string or a stalk or a stick and an egg on the end, that's a lacewing that's going to consume thousands and thousands of aphids, as will your ladybugs. So make it attractive, and additionally, when you have your garden attractive, it becomes a place of beauty and wonder where you want to look at and where you can catch pests before you have no leaves on your plant, where you can turn over your leaves and say, on the underneath side of those leaves, there are some egg clusters that I've identified as not belonging here. I can just brush them off. So in order to attract the good guys, I always plant zinnias. I always let dill be in flower. When you allow dill to be in flower, it not only attracts ladybugs and lacewings, it attracts tiny little non-stinging wasps that prey on a lot of caterpillars, such as the white cabbage butterfly. So dill and chamomile, with their small flower structures, really attract the smaller insects. Marigolds are wonderful with tomatoes. Even cilantro or coriander, if you let it flower, has the same type of flowering structure as dill does. It will bring in the really small beneficial insects. And garlic, even planted sequentially throughout your garden, can be used as a pest repellent, even if you don't get a bulb out of it. Mint, you can either put in an herb garden or at the edge of your garden, and a way to manage mint is to put it in a pot that has a bottom on it, so it doesn't escape at the bottom, and leave the top of that pot above the soil level. That way you can plant spearmint and chocolate mint and peppermint in different areas of your garden. And the bad guys, things that happen, you know, Japanese beetle is now, we never had it up until 3 or 4 years ago. You can use soap sprays and garlic sprays on a lot of these things. I have a slide that shows some of the ways of prevention of keeping out flea beetles and some of the early season pests. For cutworms, where that just cut your plant off at soil level, strategies such as slitting a toilet paper roll down its middle and putting it over your new transplant with part of the toilet paper tube above ground and part below ground are going to be a wonderful way to prevent that happening. Soap sprays for your cabbage looper. The butterflies are going to be out flying soon. That's the white cabbage butterfly. Brushing the eggs off. Grasshopper, there is a company called Arbico, A-R-B-I-C-O, Arbico Organics, that sells a product called Nolo Bait, which is a parasite of grasshoppers. They are increasingly a problem for the home gardener, not just for the large farm. So Nolo Bait is specific to grasshoppers, and aphids you can wash off with a strong spray of water. Curling leaves are showing aphids damage. That cover that you're seeing is called a fabric row cover. They are spun polyester, and you can either put them directly over your plants or, you know, just do a little wire hoop that you see. You can weight that fabric down with rocks. They do need to be removed when pollination occurs, but certainly for a plant such as broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower that gets attacked by aphids and butterflies that then produce the holes, the white cabbage butterfly, those would be a wonderful strategy to keep on for quite a long period of time. If you're working with a fruiting plant that needs pollination, such as peas or squash, they would need, or cucumbers, they would need to be removed when the blossoms form. You can hand pick your pests once you identify them, such as your Japanese beetles, and drown them in buckets of soapy water. You can use strong garlic sprays, and as we mentioned before, plant flowers and herbs. So I'm not saying that you need to incorporate all of these practices. One or two of them, if you try one or two of them, you just say a list. This is on my list of things to do that I've not done before. You're definitely going to be improving your soil health, increasing biodiversity, inviting in beneficial insects that are then not only going to increase pollination, but they're going to then lay their eggs. And the larval stage of those beneficial insects are the really pest chompers. These are the heavy duty fighters. You're going to be practicing water conservation through your mulching. You're going to be capturing carbon from the atmosphere as it's stored in the soil, and definitely decreasing the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And health benefits, which I want you to know about. Organically raised food obviously doesn't expose us to the lingering effects of pesticide residue, all of which are known associated risks with cancer, reproductive problems, and our nervous system disorders. But definitely it's been shown that organically raised food, higher in what we call phytochemicals, which are the colors of fruits and vegetables, are higher in certain vitamins and minerals. So reviewing our strategies, prime, respecting and covering that soil. You cannot have healthy plants, whether you're talking veggies or flowers or herbs, without having healthy soil. We're going to think about ways that we can decrease disturbing our soil. We're going to identify our good guys and bad guys. And one of the things that I wrote years ago is just when you take small steps that restore our earth, it makes us active partners, one person at a time, in caring for and promoting a balanced ecosystem. So a few Doug's slides before I take questions and read you my last thing is to get a little bit of understanding. We are a critical component of the local food system. More than 17,500 people directly benefit from Doug Gardens each year. We do a lot of food donation in our plots. We grow collectively over 600,000 pounds of food Of that, we donate over 60,000 pounds, either to people who are experiencing food insecurity or to food banks directly across our Metro Denver area. And we are actively helping to build healthy living soils and regenerate through our Master Composter Training Program, which is a Train the Trainer program. And you have that link on the screen. We will be offering free compost classes beginning in June, www.doug.org/compost. And we'd love to see you involved, however you feel comfortable, either whether it's in joining our networks. We have a new community involvement network, which you can join. It's free, community.doug.org, whether it's becoming a sustaining member. And to let you know that we really have active volunteer opportunities, whether it is physically working with us in a garden, whether it is providing your wisdom. And a lot of the volunteer opportunities help them through their collective action to provide leadership and training to our further over 500 garden leaders who all work together with us to build and sustain strong, resilient communities from the ground up. So I want to thank you a lot, but I want to, before perhaps, definitely want to take time for chat questions. I want to read you something that I start my Master Composter programs with. It kind of sums up regenerative agriculture. And I wish I could tell you who wrote this. It's on the internet and it's kind of an anonymous author, but it's called The Lawn According to God. God, Frank, you know all about gardens and nature. What in the world is going on down there on the planet? Why, whatever happened to the dandelions, violets, thistle and stuff that I started eons ago? I had a perfect no maintenance garden plan. Why, those plants grow in any type of soil. They withstand drought and they multiply with abandon. And additionally, the nectar from the long-lasting blossoms attracts butterflies, honeybees, and flocks of songbirds. I really expected to see a vast garden of colors by now, but all I see are these green rectangles. St. Francis, it's the tribes that settled down here, Lord, the suburbanites. They started calling your flowers weeds and went to great lengths to kill them and replace them with grass. God, grass? But it's so boring. It's not colorful. It doesn't attract butterflies, birds, and bees. Only grubs and sodworms. It's sensitive to temperatures. Do these suburbanites really want all this grass growing there? St. Francis, apparently so, Lord. They go to great pains to grow it and keep it green. They begin each spring by fertilizing grass, and then they poison any other plant that crops up in the lawn. St. Francis, God, but the spring rains and warm weather probably make grass grow really fast. That must make the suburbanites happy. St. Francis, apparently not, Lord. As soon as it grows a little, they cut it, sometimes twice a week. They cut it? Do they then bale it like hay? No, not exactly, Lord. Most of them rake it up and put it in bags. They bag it? Why? Is it a cash crop? Do they sell it? St. Francis, no, sir, just the opposite. They pay to throw it away. God, now let me get this straight. They fertilize grass so it will grow. And when it does grow, they cut it off and pay to throw it away? St. Francis, yes, sir. These suburbanites must be relieved in the summer when we cut back on the rain and turn up the heat. That surely slows the growth and saves them a lot of work. You aren't going to believe this, Lord. When the grass stops growing so fast, they drag out hoses and pay more money to water it so they can continue to mow it and pay to get rid of it. What nonsense. At least they kept some of the trees. That was a sheer stroke of genius, if I do say so myself. Why, the trees grow leaves in the spring to provide beauty and shade in the summer. In the autumn, they fall to the ground and form a natural blanket to keep moisture in the soil and protect the trees and bushes. Why, it's a natural cycle of life. You better sit down, Lord. The suburbanites have drawn a new circle. As soon as the leaves fall, they rake them into great piles and pay to have them haul away. No. What do they do to protect the shrub and tree roots in the winter to keep the soil moist and loose? Well, after throwing away the leaves, they go out and buy something which they call mulch. They haul it home and spread it around in place of the leaves. And where do they get this mulch? St. Francis. They cut down the trees and grind them up to make the mulch. God, enough. I don't want to think about this anymore. St. Catherine, you're in charge of the arts. What movie have you scheduled for us tonight? St. Catherine, Dumb and Dumber Lord. It's a story about, never mind. I think I just heard the whole story from St. Francis. So anyway, folks.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. We will open it to questions, and Larry Strauser is going to manage the question and answer session.
I would love to provide some answers, maybe.
So if everybody would put their questions that they have in chat, we've got one from Pam that was put in quite a while ago. It's 3 questions about worms. So I'll ask the 3 questions, and then if you, for all 3 of them, and you probably can answer them, but we can go back and review them. The first question is, are red wiggler worms the only species used for successful vermiculture? Are night crawlers as successful? And the third question is, do we have invasive jumping worms in Colorado?
Okay, so red wigglers are the preferred species for vermicomposting. They live in the same type of temperatures, our preferred temperatures, 55 to 77 degrees. And they make shallow burrows. So we do not use night crawlers. So the other type of worm that can be used, however, are European night crawlers, which are in the same family as red wiggler worms. They do not require the cold outdoor temperatures of night crawlers. They also don't make deep burrows, and they are going to adapt just fine to indoor conditions. Now, my worm boxes come indoors from our compost demo site by the end of October, and they go out by mid-May. And the worms actually outdoors need to be provided a really shady position. So normally we have them under shade cloth, and sometimes I will put bales of straw around the box too, just to keep away some of the extreme heat. So 55 to 77 with red wiggler worms, we do not have those jumping worms that you're talking about. So hopefully that has answered your question about worms. What else have we got?
Okay, we've got a question from Rush that also is interest to me, because I may be making a mistake, because his question is, what is your opinion of the use of earth boxes for urban gardening? And the reason why it's interest to me is that I have an earth box. So I'm hoping that your answer doesn't tell me to get rid of it, but I will if you tell me to.
So I would ask for a further elucidation about earth boxes, since I don't use them. Further description.
Okay, well, Rush, I mean, my earth box is about 4 feet long, about maybe 18 inches wide,
Yeah.
and about 2 feet top to bottom. And when you buy an earth box, you get all the vermiculite and the soil and everything you need to get it started. You plant whatever, usually I plant I plant mostly basil. I have so much basil, I give it away to the neighbors, even though we eat a lot of it. But any event, and then you cover it up with a plastic thing in the wintertime, and then take it out. You regenerate some of the soil, and you go again. Is that about right, Rush? You can just
And typically the watering systems are from the bottom.
Okay,
right.
so it's one of these contained gardening mixes, and it sounds like it's pretty much a soilless mix. Is that correct, Rush and Larry? It has its own type of soil mix in it.
Yes.
Okay, so the only question, it's very much like a raised bed system, other than the fact that it has its own contained irrigation system, so it provides you its own irrigation. So the only problem with that is the rooting structure in those type of systems do not get access to our native soil. So a good type of an addition, like you would in a raised bed, would be to add some native soil to that to provide an array of naturally occurring microorganisms. Also dealing with a soilless mix, as you would in container gardening, it's going to require additional supplementation with nutrients during the season. But I have
Okay.
no problem with using those boxes any way that a person wants to get gardening, fine. But I do think that the addition of native soil, and also realizing that if you have with a shallow plants that are rooting in a shallow rooting medium are probably going to be more susceptible to conditions like sun scald in tomatoes or lack of foliar cover and definitely wind damage. So just be prepared for supporting them anyways. A little bit of shade would be nice, some shade cloth over it, a little bit of native soil in it. And probably a couple times during the season, sea kelp and fish emulsion fertilizer would be good. If you don't choose to use that, the Espoma company, ESPOMA, puts out a really nice organic fertilizer that you can use. But nothing substitutes for the native soil mixed in.
Great. Thank you, Judy. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And yeah, actually in it now for my basil, the roots go down, end up going when I pull out the bottom part of the plant in the fall, the roots go down quite a ways. So
Good.
I was pretty happy with that the first couple of years I've used it. So that the roots went down deep.
Great.
But
I think for that's a
I will
great
use,
thing for basil. And what a
yeah,
wonderful crop to share.
I will
I love that you're
grow.
sharing.
I
Yeah.
will add some native Colorado soil. Now here's one from Hillary. What do you think about wood chip mulch?
Now, wood chip mulch in perennial beds is fine. Wood chip mulch in veggie gardens is not fine. And the reason it's not fine is that it's very high in what we call a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So as that decomposes normally, the microorganisms that do decomposition for us are going to use nitrogen from the soil to decompose it. So you can get some nitrogen depletion in your crops. So for instance, Denver Recycles runs a mulch giveaway, a free mulch giveaway on May 1st, which is basically the mulched up Christmas trees. And we recommend that be for pathways or around trees and shrubs or around perennials, but not in veggie gardens, please.
Thank you. Hillary has another question. What are your strategies for bindweed and also for dandelions?
Okay. So, if you're not eating your dandelions, then I love, first of all, this is the time of the year for digging dandelions and for digging bindweed. There's a favorite tool that I have. It's expensive. It's a hand tool, and it's called a hori. I'll spell that for you. That's HORI/HORI. It is a Japanese rock garden weeding tool, and it's also used for separating perennials. And the way you manage it with bindweed is just starting to emerge now. And for anybody who has bindweed, our challenge is that we wait far too long. By the time it's, in the morning glory family has taken over everything. A hori allows us to, the same thing with, allows us to dissect the roots. You can actually get down underneath. You can use it the same way that you would use to remove quackgrass, which is one of our cool season fall grasses. You dig down where you see it emerging in moist soil, and then you basically dissect its root structure as it creeps underground. You can do that really, and you keep digging it. When it comes up again, you keep digging it. And what happens with bindweed when you do that is that you deplete its storage of carbohydrates in the roots, and the plant eventually dies. For dandelion, you do the same thing. You dig down before the flowers are, ideally before the flowers are spreading seeds all over the place. and having a taproot. If that taproot breaks, you dig it again. The worst thing you can do, absolutely worst thing for eliminating dandelions or bindweed, is to do rototilling. That breaks up the root structure into billions of pieces that say, thanks, you've given me a new place to grow. I'll do that and spread me out. So dig it again
Okay.
if you break the root on the taproot.
All right,
You weaken it.
thanks. Pam has another question she asked. What alternatives can you suggest to the usual grassy lawns, especially for yards with dogs?
Okay, well, I think first of all, getting a good design. There's a wonderful catalog that I love, and it's called High Country Gardens. High Country Gardens operates out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they are the experts in high altitude water smart, what's called water smart, used to be called xeriscape gardening. So I think that sequentially planting, first of all, deciding, what do I have in my yard that's a permanent fixture? Deciding what's your permanent fixtures. Okay, I have trees. What type of sunlight do I have? How much area do I actually need to use for walking? So for instance, what I've done over the space of many years in my front yard is to actually remake a dying bluegrass lawn into a place which is rivals, and so I don't want to say rivals, but mimics some parts of the Botanic Gardens because it's designed in different zones. So I think one of the best ways is to look at zones, to look at one area of your yard and say, where do I get most pleasure? What do I want to reformulate first? Then certainly not try and move rock yourself, have a landscape construction company, and also remove any of the fabric that might be underneath the rock, which I'm sure the rocks have penetrated and the weeds are growing there. And then to the backbone of a transformation is what do I want from this garden? A water smart garden is a mix of shrubs and grasses and flowers, and it has seasonal beauty. So for instance, at this time of the year, some of my xeriscape gardens are, they've been designed, first of all, because one of my granddaughters loves butterflies. So the front lawn now has butterfly wings on it, okay? And the butterfly wings then created a little raised area that has a mix of lavender and ground covers to show the space in between the butterfly wings that you can walk on, and some of our small grasses, and some plants such as some of the dwarf campanulas that are around, basically some of the dwarf coneflowers that are around. So a mix of grasses that you then allow to stand over winter, some raised areas, and understanding that plants that have gray leaves, gray finely divided leaves, are the most drought tolerant. And to look at a catalog like High Country Gardens that will give you design ideas. Also to visit a wonderful nursery in Boulder that's run by a friend of mine called Michael Bronner. That's MichaelBrawner. Michael runs a fabulous nursery of natives called Harlequin's Nursery off of 26th Street. Michael will talk your head off. He is an ex-arborist. He will talk your head off regarding native shrubs such as mountain mahogany and fern bush, to align you with a proper mix of shrubs and perennial selections and grasses to start you off with.
Great answer there. Karen has a question that actually, her question includes something that you just discussed when you answered Pam's last question. Her question is, I moved to a home that utilized landscape fabric in the garden areas, non-food gardens. What is your opinion of fabric? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially for ground cover. What do you think about that?
So I think landscape fabric, in my personal opinion, is not the way to go. And the main reason is that landscape fabric, although it may be a short-term, have a short-term benefit in helping to keep some of the weeds down, not only is eventually punctured by roots, but more seriously depletes the supply of air in our soil. So a soil that's covered with landscape does not allow those roots to penetrate deeply and to get enough air. So a lot of the reason, very honestly, for some trees doing poorly in our area is the fact that not that trees don't grow here, is that there's an awful lot of landscape fabric in landscape. So it's not a solution to weeds. Rocks and roots eventually penetrate it. More importantly, it decreases air supply in our soil.
Thanks. That's good to know. Bruce has a question that it follows up on one of the bullets you had in one of your slides about sequestration of carbon used by regenerative gardening.
Yeah.
And so Bruce is wondering, well, what if you scale this up? Do you have any thoughts on the global scale of the ability of regenerative commercial agriculture to sequester carbon in the soil, possibly even solving the climate crisis?
This is pretty interesting because for in addition to the Earth Day panels that we had at Doug, for some reason, I was lucky enough to watch 2 hours worth of an Earth Day presentation by Greta Thunberg. So wonderful teenager, just turned 18. And her feeling is that absolutely, there are lots of promises that are being made. But until we act on it, until we say that we are ready individually to deal with one person at a time, that's where it starts. The global scale starts each one of us doing one of those regenerative agriculture techniques. And then it starts with supporting suppliers like natural grocers that are growing close to home, that are supporting farmers that are practicing regenerative techniques, who are doing cover cropping on a large scale, who are doing things like rotational grazing, which is utilizing their agriculture, their farm animals in different ways, not raising them on feedlots, but allowing them to rotationally graze, which means fencing off different sections of their land. So the animals are mimicking the effect of what bison did in our last century. They're chomping down those grasses. Their hooves are opening up holes in the soil, and the grasses are being allowed with their roots to stay in the soil. So on a larger scale, basically, what I encourage you to do, which is not use chemicals or pesticides, to maybe even support some of the things that are happening right now here, like there is an initiative to renew the licensing of Suncor power plant here in Denver, which is one of the greatest industrial pollutants. So to get with your council people and say, I absolutely don't support that sulfur dioxide going in the atmosphere, which is affecting our communities of color, again, in Elyria and Swansea, again, people that can least affect it. So to speak with your pocketbook, to speak with your mouth, to support those suppliers and producers that are practicing these techniques, and to definitely, on your scale, do cover crops whose roots can keep that carbon in the air. And just as a backtrack, when we're talking about carbon capture, we're looking at the whole process of photosynthesis. Really, that's what it is. Plants need carbon dioxide. They utilize carbon from dioxide from the air in their leaves and in their stems to photosynthesize, to make sugars and starches, which are then translocated down into the roots. And the roots then go ahead and utilize some of those extra sugars and starches to feed the microorganisms. That carbon is stored in the soil. So it's been surmised that if people did cover cropping on a larger basis and enough producers went into regenerative techniques, you would have enough carbon capture to really significantly reverse global warming.
So Amy has a follow-up question to that. Does Doug measure the amount of carbon it sequesters in its gardens? And if so, what tools are you using to estimate this carbon sequestration?
No, I have to say that we do not. We are not to that level. We are at the level that we do not allow any use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers. And we do soil testing on all of our new gardens to make sure that we're not overutilizing fertilizer or using compost. And we do make sure that any soil amendment that we use has gone through stringent soil testing. So, but we do not measure. We allow our partners at CSU that are on a larger scale to do that stuff.
Okay, so I have a question of my own on that. Do you know of any Colorado colleges and universities that are studying that right now, or any universities?
Yeah, I believe that CSU is doing that right now.
Okay.
CSU together, and I know that the Rodale Institute that was measured before is a major leader. They've written a white paper about carbon sequestration. So I'd encourage you to get on their website and read their scientific data about carbon sequestration.
Oh, great. Good. I will do that. Okay, so Karen has another question. How do you add compost to ground covers?
So what you're going to do is you're going to top, first of all, what I do is, even with ground covers, I lightly cultivate. You know, for instance, let's think of a ground cover like creeping thyme or something like that. And we also need to think about, do we need to add compost to every ground cover, okay? Because compost is not appropriate for some native plants and for some drought tolerant plants. So for instance, specifically in my garden, a ground cover such as ice plant, which normally would come from South Africa, I do not add compost to the soil. I do not add compost around creeping thyme that grows normally in rocky areas. So I think that you need to balance the soil amendment to the plant that you're using. But normally what I would do I would just top dress, meaning take a couple of handfuls or a shovel full of compost. I would probably run that compost through a screen, through 1/4-inch hardware cloth to make sure I'm screening out any large pieces of wood, and then top dress it just on the surface and lightly scratch it in either with a hori-hori or a ground rake. Good.
Thank you very much. Milt has an interesting question, and it's interesting because I don't understand it, but I'm hopefully that you will. What do you think of using biochar to amend the soil?
So biochar is a wood product such as charcoal, or it's wood that has been burned at high temperatures in the absence of oxygen. It's a wonderful soil amendment. I feel that it's most beneficial to use in combination with compost. It does not provide the same release of organic nutrients, but it does open up air holes in our soil, and it does stay there for a long period of time. So it's a wonderful product. That's my feeling about biochar.
Thank you very much. We don't have any other questions now in chat, and since we're 5 minutes over, I'm going to ask Pam if she might close out this session.
Sure. Oh, it's been very, very helpful, Judy. You're just such a wonderful source of information. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for everybody else to be here. I just would ask you on this Earth Day Sunday to make a plan to do at least one change in your gardening practices this season. And hopefully we can get back together and compare notes and see what's worked. So thank you again, Judy, and thank you to all.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
Thank you. You're
Have a
getting a
beautiful rest
lot
of your day,
of
people.
kudos in chat, Judy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.